You have a few more seconds to get ready.
Thank you.
Oh, Jack, I like that.
Doesn't fit that well.
Boom.
You gotta put the collar.
Ready?
That's gonna hurt.
You ready? Alright, where's it?
That's actually sick. You'd like do it like that.
Alright, look.
There you go.
There's one
Fire flames.
There's one mutton chop.
Everyone else.
Miss Kennedy, this isn't everybody, right?
Teachers aren't. See,
Guys, this is the order that you are going in.
Oh, where am I?
1, 2, 3, 4.
first. Didn't you want to go? She wanted to go first.
I'm second to last.
I'm way at the back. I kind of wanted to go first. I wanted to know.
Who's John Ross?
No, look. Alexander
Going
Hamilton.
after.
No, I'm Andrew Jackson.
Who's John Ross? Who am I going
I'm
after?
going sixth.
Oh, Bob Ross.
Bob Ross?
Alexander Hamilton.
Who's someone just told me you're Alexander Hamilton.
It's Joey.
Oh yeah, Joey. Joey,
You're last. You're last. You're the last person to
You're
present.
second to last.
I don't know how well this is gonna stick to my face. It's kind of falling off already.
When do you go? You might not want to put it on yet.
I'm really nervous.
Too
Should I
late.
change? I brought my dress. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Can we trade the
I am
spots?
not on here. I am not on here.
What are you? Who are you?
John C. Calhoun.
John C. Cal. I put John C. Cal here.
Nope.
No,
He's not on here.
I did shop in my.
not on yet.
No, he doesn't.
What do you think?
You don't have to go then.
Will, tell me honestly, what do you think?
I think it's great.
Kind of falling apart.
No, I think it's great.
Your mutton chops are
Yeah, it looks great.
freaking fire flame.
Keep it.
Fire flames. Freaking fire flames.
You wanna switch?
Open me a piece of wood.
You're going like second to last though. Actually, well, alright, no.
Yeah,
Just
no.
get you'll be so happy you're third. You just get it over. with.
Mutton chops.
I went really
I wish
not
I was
all
Johnson. My pound.
I don't even think the other day he was here.
Oh my God, he is.
Yeah, Donald Trump is not here.
You like him?
Tell me if it's better if I go all the way up.
What you see?
Do I look political?
All right, all the
I'm
way
pretty
up
sure
or one
political figures
down.
don't pop their collars.
All the way up.
Alright, so, guys, can you please pay attention 2 seconds? The following people are not in attendance
It's actually
today.
really good. Donald Trump is not in attendance today.
Too busy golfing.
John Ross. We can change John Ross to John C. Calhoun.
Oh.
My performance.
Grade 1 has to go away for the other.
I'm not gonna lie, my
John C. Calhoun, John Ross.
Shit, I'm going after maths.
We will not be seeing Donald Trump.
That's a bummer.
You can cross off Donald Trump.
it's like the only one I was looking forward to.
I know, really.
You can also cross off James K. Polk.
Okay, I don't know why, but my freaking tape is leaking sand right now.
Isn't Strode playing the piano?
John Ross is
Yeah.
John C. Calhoun.
Where's James?
Strode has to run to his car real quick because he left his
Will you read
laser
mine?
or something.
You don't have to read all of it. You can just like scan the.
Okay, everybody's here? Except for Emma. She's yeah.
Oh, is Strode here?
Oh yeah, Strode.
Strode is
Oh, there he is.
There he is.
Where's your wheelchair?
Looking very funeral-like.
I think Paul.
Wheelchair is not in attendance.
Like me.
Do you need help tying that?
Minus
Like
10
trip,
points
like
immediately
going
for no
up.
wheelchair.
Where am I sitting? Anywhere?
Strode, pull up a seat right there.
I made fortune.
There's not a lot of people here at all.
My father gave me a small amount of $1 million. I transformed it into an empire.
Adelina, who are you?
Rachel Jackson?
Never became president. I am the president. He doesn't know.
Will, I think you got
First time.
Carolina as a wife.
Yeah. Henry Clay killed her. So,
Your jacket.
yeah.
Life is pain.
Who's Thomas Jefferson? Are you Thomas Jefferson?
Nope.
Who's Thomas Jefferson?
Eden. All right. gentlemen,
You
are
look
we
like
ready?
flames.
Yeah.
Stroh looks like he's going out to the country club.
I don't know where my wheelchair is here.
We're in the mask.
You can get one from the Black Box.
Got it.
You can get one from the Black Box.
Check out these mutton chops.
I'm so
Okay.
nervous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remember that you are writing as you are listening,
Whose is this?
okay?
Mine?
You can bring up your eulogy. When you are finished, you are going to hand the eulogy to me. Okay? Yeah. Yeah? Okay.
Is everyone going
Can you do me, everybody, can you sit in between Adelina and Dan? Thank you. Alright. So, if you could please have David Wilmot to say his brief.
Oh, Maddie, you first.
Clap at a few?
Yeah, clap at a funeral.
Anyone got a
Am I funeral?
Friends, family, patriots, politicians, we are gathered here today to mourn the loss over a very influential man that made a lasting impact on economic and social development on America. We are here to reflect on his passing and share our memories, whether they are good or bad, in Henry Clay. Although some of you stand here today and believe he ruined America, some of you may believe he made the country flourish. Regardless of your views, we have come together to remember a man who impacted this country for better or for worse. Let's put our differences aside and remember the life of Henry Clay. My name is David Wilmot. Most of you may know me best for the creation of the Wilmot Proviso, where I propose to eliminate slavery within the land obtained by Mexico as a result of the Mexican War in 1846 through 1850. But enough about me. I like to talk about the relationship between Clay and Clay. It was a very interesting one to say the least. As you know, Henry Clay was a man of the people, a headstrong man. He made many compromises to try and create solutions to keep the country at peace and maintain unity. Sorry. Okay.
Does she like Henry Clay?
Is it gonna come from right here?
As soon as I'm out of the room, feel free.
Some of the acts I didn't always agree with, such as Clay's Missouri Compromise. The purpose of the act was to create a balance of power between slaveholding states and free states. Maine was admitted as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. Now, I personally saw that as a bad idea because as a proponent of abolishing slavery, I believe many northern states would get mad at the fact that the South was getting too much power. Although I am not the typical abolitionist, I believe giving the South more power will just result in more civil disputes amongst the country. I also did not agree with the fact that Clay himself was a slaveholder. It seems quite hypocritical to say you want to create balance and have peace within the country in regards to slavery when he himself owned multiple slaves. But anyway, like I was saying before, our relationship was strange. I didn't always agree with what he was proposing, but I did believe in some of it. Some of the bills he proposed in the Compromise of 1850 I did agree with. In the Compromise, it had 5 separate bills to try and adhere to and please the different views and demands of the politicians and people in the country. Out of the 5 bills, I had a strong liking for 3 of them. California being admitted as a free state, the end of slave trade in the District of Columbia, and Utah and New Mexico territory having slavery be decided on popular sovereignty. These are great ways to start slowly abolishing slavery and guiding America on the right path to, in the future, end it once and for all. Although my proviso was sadly denied by the Senate multiple times, I was glad to see that certain changes were being made and a person realized there needed to be peace in America. I know many of you sitting in this room today might not always have agreed with what he was proposing and believed he was an aggressive politician. But I'm here today standing before you saying, sure, I may not have always agreed with his character and his decisions regarding slavery, but I believe he tried to do what was right for America as a whole and make decisions based off the general welfare of America and the people. Henry Clay was a man who knew what he wanted and was not afraid to fight for what he believed was right, up until his dying days. I can see a little bit of him in me because I myself knew what I wanted to do and switched political parties many times based on my beliefs and theories on how to make America a better place. Just like Henry Clay, God rest his soul, once said, of all the properties which belong to honorable men, not one is so highly prized as that of character. and his character shined through in every decision he made. Henry will be missed and hated by many, but if one thing's for sure, he will never be forgotten.
I said no.
How did you like it?
Relationship.
All right. Howdy, I'm Abraham Lincoln. All right. All right. Greetings, everyone. We are here today to mourn the death of Henry Clay, a man who envisioned our nation free from injustice and turmoil, as well as free of enslaved servants. I, myself, have had the opportunity to speak upon the death of Henry once before. Even though that day, oh so long ago, is a memory in the past, 164 years later, it still pulls at my emotions, deep inside. Henry was a, quote, beau ideal of a statesman, end quote, who inspired me as I grew within the political realm of the controversial 1800s. Henry's early years are similar to the ones I experienced, where we worked for what we wanted and had limited educational opportunities. He supported the abolitionist movements and the idea that our country would be more beneficial as a free state rather than one of slavery. Henry Clay supported numerous anti-slavery movements, such as, quote, the Missouri Compromise and the, quote, Compromise of 1850. Similar to what I would do in later years, such as my push towards emancipation in 1862. I followed his lead as he was an early supporter of the American Colonization Society, a system dedicated to sending free Africans back to Africa. We both belonged to the Whig Party and supported the American system, which involved internal improvements based off protective tariffs. We also opposed the unjustified war proclaimed with Mexico in 1846 over undisputed land in Southwest America. In complete honesty, I have never met a man so devoted to his cause and the good of the people he served. Henry Clay was a true-hearted American, and I would only inspire to be him. Being here today has been an immense honor and privilege, once again mourning this great man's death. I wish to end this eulogy as I did on that hot day in July back in 1852. Quote, Henry Clay is dead. His long and eventful life is closed. Our country is prosperous. Our country is prosperous and powerful, but could it have been quite all it has been and is to be without Henry Clay? Such a man the times have demanded, and such in the providence of God was given to us. But he is gone. Let us strive to deserve, as far as mortals may, the continued care and divine providence, trusting that, in future national emergencies, he will not fail to provide us the instruments of safety and security. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Harriet Timman. I'm here today to talk about Henry Clay. Henry's passing is difficult to put into reality. He was a very skilled representative of Kentucky and an American lawyer. He was a senator of Kentucky and a part of the Whig Party. California was a state that longed for freedom and eventually received it thanks to Henry Clay. He put in his all to free California but did not abolish slavery altogether. The Compromise of 1850 was a major achievement by Henry that upheld slavery. In 1798, Clay advocated the emancipation in Kentucky and thought that slavery was evil, even though he slightly participated in it. Henry was also a founder of the American Colonization Society. This was something that promoted the sending of freed slaves to Africa. He put a lot of effort into not supporting slavery, but he still went into its direction. I am a slave who escaped and became an abolitionist. My whole life, I was a conductor of the Underground Railroad. I helped hundreds of slaves move from the South to the North for freedom. Like I have said before, I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. Slavery was a harsh part of my life and was never taken away completely. Henry and I did not always get along, but still had some things in common. We both tried and succeeded to help slaves come to freedom. During the time of my escape, Henry proposed multiple resolutions that he believed would help the North and South's interests. At one point in our lives, we were both trying our best to end slavery altogether. Henry Clay was a strong-willed politician whose efforts greatly affected my life and lives of thousands of slaves. He will be dearly missed and never forgotten. May he rest in peace.
Hi, I am Rachel Jackson. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are holding a funeral in honor of Henry Clay. What exactly is a funeral? For some, it is a way to mourn those who have died. For others, it is a way to celebrate a life that is now gone. But this funeral is a combination of the two, a celebration of death. Now, I know you're all thinking that it isn't too kind to rejoice in someone's passing, but this man is one that I have been waiting to leave this earth for quite some time now. Before I left this earth myself, I said that I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than live in that palace at Washington. You see, I was to be the First Lady of the United States. My husband, Andrew Jackson, ran during the 1828 election against John Quincy Adams. Henry Clay, who ran against Jackson and lost early on, once said, "Of all human powers operating on the affairs of mankind, none is greater than that of competition." And my husband was quite the competition for Henry Clay. In fact, since the War of 1812, which Clay campaigned for and my husband served in as general, the two have been great political rivals. Henry Clay made a corrupt bargain that got him the position of Secretary of State for supporting Adams. There was a lot of mudslinging in this race, and somehow I became involved. I did not want to leave my home in Tennessee to go to the Capitol, but I was very proud of my husband, and I knew I needed to fulfill my duties as First Lady. But even after my husband won the election, there were still rumors floating around. The day I was to leave for the White House, I read an article that talked about my past marriage and fights with Andrew Jackson entitled "Marriage Mayhem and Presidential Politics, the Robard-Jackson Backcountry Scandal." I was so shocked by the article, I ran off to a river and later died. Some people say I died from a heart attack, but it was really from the attack on my heart. You know, they say Henry Clay died from the disease tuberculosis, but I think it was the disease inside him that eventually ate him up and killed him. I was not the only one, the only woman, to be attacked by Henry Clay. He even rejected his own daughter's marriage for belief that her husband was a rebel. There is reason behind his bitterness. Henry Clay ran for president 5 times and was unsuccessful for every single one. I'm sure you are familiar with the saying, "I would rather be right than president." Well, let's just say that he wanted to be president very badly, so the right part was not always seen through. He created the American system, one with higher tariffs, which I and my husband are against as Democrats. But the government system in general is not working the way we need it to, the system that Henry Clay has been running for decades. Our youth are not failing the system. The system is failing our youth. Ironically, the very youth who are being treated the worst are the young people who are going to lead us out of this nightmare of Henry Clay. With him gone, the Whig Party will die out. Mr. Clay, all your schemes, all your compromises have caused you to compromise your life. So here is to the current youth, the poor class that Henry Clay was not concerned with regarding the gap between them and the rich. You are America. Thank you.
Who's he? Thomas Jefferson. So who do we replace with John C. Calhoun? John Ross.
Hello? I am Thomas Jefferson. I was the 3rd president of the United States, and Henry Clay was one of my acquaintances through politics. Henry Clay was a hardworking of a man as you will ever meet, although he has no presidencies to prove it. Nice try, buddy. Henry was one of the most influential politicians of his time. I was retired during most of his political career, but we did speak on many occasions. In times of need, he was there for me, and he always was very respectful. Henry actually helped me clear up some debt my grandson had acquired back in 22. But more importantly, his action in Kentucky by moving all the electoral college districts around gave me all of the votes in the electoral college during the '04 election, which I went on to win. And that was the good stuff. Although I'd say we helped each other kindly, if we ever did get into an argument, he was always willing to compromise. So that made our friendship easy. Henry also sent a letter a while back about receiving some letters that had arrived from the museum at Paris for studies at UVA, my university, the best university. Go Cavaliers. I actually have the letter here. Actually, I'm not going to read it. He basically just says that he is going to send me the letters. So, you know how old English is with the commas and stuff. If I'm going to be honest, it's very annoying to read. And I always said that honesty is the first chapter in the Book of Wisdom. I might not be as honest as Honest Abe over here, but believe me, I did tell Henry that he should shave his mutton chops on many occasions, but didn't take my advice. I also told him about a man who he defended, Aaron Burr, that he was actually, in fact, guilty of conspiring to take a militant advance, I guess, into Florida before it was our territory. And the next time Henry saw Burr, so I've heard, Henry didn't even shake his hand. So he wasn't willing to compromise then. Ultimately, Henry and I had a good relationship, and although he tried and failed 3 times to become president, I'm sure up in heaven he'll try again, and maybe he'll get lucky this time. Rest in peace, buddy.
Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name, if you didn't already know, is John Tyler, the 10th President of these United States. I'm here today to honor and remember a friend and enemy. Yes, that's right, me and good old Henry were great friends, but we haven't been since my presidency. However, we'll let bygones be bygones during this time of grief. My story with Clay begins when I was 36 years old, and Henry Clay had offered me a position as U.S. Senator. Apparently, there was a conflict in who would be the new U.S. Senate. John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay were against John Randolph because he had a fiery and erratic behavior and opposed Adams. Their solution was me. At first, I totally declined the offer and thought Randolph was a perfect candidate, but after a while, I caved. Being a senator definitely wasn't easy, especially during Jackson's presidency. Jackson made some very aggravating decisions, and many were based on patronage or did not follow constitutional procedure. That's why I supported Clay's compromise tariff, which would gradually reduce the tariff over 10 years. I even voted against the force bill, which made the whole Virginia legislature upset because they felt I had turned on one of their own. I guess you could say I sided with the enemies, Henry and the Whigs. However, that didn't last very long, and me and Henry began to have our differences. Henry Clay made my presidency almost a living hell. He had the idea to establish the National Bank. He repealed the Independent Treasury Act, which distributed to the states proceeds of public land sales and an increased tariff. I'd indicated that I had serious constitutional reservations about a national bank and accepted the distribution only if the tariff was not raised. But that wasn't Clay's vision, so he didn't agree. A plan, however, for a modified version of the old Bank of the U.S. was introduced to Congress, and it had my full approval. However, not Henry's again. With support from the Whigs, Henry had the plan revised to look upon his ideas. I mean, of course he did. He couldn't be happy most of the time with anything that wasn't exactly how he envisioned it. A compromise was made in the form of restrictions on power of the bank to establish branches in the state. Now, I wasn't going to let Clay win, so I used some veto power and vetoed the compromise, making me a hated man among the people. My veto was known as unwhiggish, and many people thought of it as treason. I never ran for re-election because, like I said a few years ago, quote, in 1840, I was called from my farm to undertake the administration of public affairs, and I foresaw that I was called to a bed of thorns. I now leave that bed which has afforded me little rest and eagerly seek repose in the quiet enjoyments of rural life. However, I may have vetoed a lot and didn't much like my presidency, but we don't have time to go into the depth of my life, but remember Henry's. Like I said earlier, me and Henry were great friends who lost their connection as time went on. I mean, yes, he and the Whigs drove me nuts when I was president, but I'm not going to remember Clay that way. I'm going to remember the man who helped me dive into the political world and stood by me during my elections. All I wish in life now is for a friend to rest in peace. Thank you.
All right. I, Aaron Burr, am saddened to have to be here today at the funeral of a man who defended me well throughout my trials, but not as upset over his death at a political point of view. You see, a few years ago, I was accused of fatally shooting Alexander Hamilton in a duel, and I was also accused of plotting plans to create my own region by invading Mexican lands and separating the eastern and western states and societies, also invading Florida, too, to which both I pleaded innocent. He defended me well, and I was found not guilty for committing these accusations. However, due to later additions of evidence and information, I was proven guilty, leaving Mr. Clay, a respected lawyer, to be ashamed of my dishonesty. Besides, Henry Clay wanted to uphold slavery, an institution that destroys the lives of innocent beings, and created a compromise of 1850 to solve the controversy. Yet he opposed the idea of the Union dividing when nearly the entire north region of the nation disapproves of this pro-slavery notion. Not to mention, Mr. Clay approved of the National Bank, yet he refused to take notice of my actions to provide clean water to New York City through the Manhattan Company, which later became a bank and facility to give loans to struggling working-class families. I allowed people of the middle class to hold shares of this company, allowing these oppressed citizens to have a say in how the company operated and participated, and to help participate in advancing financially. This also gave me a chance to allow plots of land to be sold in small amounts. This way, every man can pleasingly have a right to vote based off the law that owning land means you get to have a say in government and continue to expand our nation the free and rightful way. I feel that Henry Clay could have lived a longer life if he weren't so stubborn with his political stances and isolating points of view. If only Henry was alive this instant to take a look at the state of the nation and how divided we are on his own positions. After all, I have said before, never do today what you can do tomorrow. Something may occur to make you regret your premature action. I believe firmly that Mr. Clay was a very intelligent man, but he could have taken a closer look at how to reshape the Southern economy rather than continuing to allow slavery, an institution that destroys lives, to continue for much longer than it should, on the idea that economy in the South depends on it. Besides, wouldn't the American system have helped to prosper the South with its support from Henry Clay after slavery would have been abolished? After all, federal subsidies don't cover the enslavement of minorities. Rest in peace.
Echo.
Rest in peace.
JQA.
has laryngitis, runs in his family.
Dang it.
So are you going?
Hello, I am John C. Calhoun. We are here to remember the great statesman Henry Clay. As his good friend and fellow politician, I'd like to get rid of the elephant in the room. Although he was a terrific member and important piece of the government of the United States, clearly we can tell he was not the best to look at. I mean, just take a look. The dude was ugly. But nevertheless, what he lacked in physical appearance, he made up for with intellect and duty to his country and to liberty. He was proud to be an American, and more importantly, he was proud to be a free man. Henry was a proponent of the free man, no matter what area of the globe. His career in the government lasted a year shy of 50 years, and he was involved in almost every major event of this period. Henry was always in the middle of everything, which is a shame with that face of his. He created several key compromises in the government to try to lessen sectional tensions. After all, he was called the Great Compromiser. The Missouri Compromise was his first political success. With his help, Clay created balance in the government by adding Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, as well as prohibiting slavery in territories such as territories north of the Missouri's southern border. Although I do agree with the balance of the states, I did feel as if Clay's compromise created a division in the Union, but I'll save that chat for later. As I once said, learn from your mistakes and build on your successes. Henry Clay did just that. The terrible tariff of 1824, or the tariff of abominations, was so bad for us Southerners. We had to pay more money for northern produced goods. The South was distraught, and South Carolina presented the nullification crisis, or the secession of the South Carolina from the Union if the unconstitutional tariffs were used. Henry Clay's second major compromise, the Tariff Compromise of 1833, was acceptable for us Southerners. It aided in the creation of the compromise, and Clay truly took everyone's well-being into consideration. What a guy. The high tax on imported goods would be lowered over a period of 10 years. Our deceased buddy over here proposed this idea. Clay's final piece of notable work, the Great Compromise of 1850, had to do with slavery and land, just like the first compromise. The North received California as a free state, as well as the slave trade being prohibited in D.C. The South got fugitive slave law, $10 million to Texas, and no slavery restrictions in New Mexico or Utah. Not too shabby, but in my opinion, slavery is a practice that benefits all parties involved. Our friend Clay disagreed with me on the matter of slavery, but nonetheless he aided me in creating my political career. I joined his War Hawk Party, fighting for the War of 1812, as well as the Whig Party after. We shared similar views on many things, and I looked up to him. Didn't look at his face, though. Clay failed on gaining the presidency numerous times, 3 to be exact. He struck out, but he certainly went out swinging with his tremendous compromises, and as his friend and fellow statesman, I will truly miss him, and I'm filled with sorrow. He will always be remembered as the Great Compromiser.
I can go. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Biddle. It's so unfortunate that we are gathered here today for the tragic passing of the wonderful man named Henry Clay. He was a very intelligent gentleman who always wanted the best for America. I'm so honored that I was privileged to know such a determined and loyal man. Henry Clay and I saw pretty eye to eye when it came to politics and opinions on what strengthened and what weakened the United States. Clay was one of the creators of the American system, along with a few other members of the Whig Party. The system supported the preservation of the Bank of the United States and would stabilize our currency, creating an ease to trade. As most people know here, I'm the president of the bank, and Clay and I had mutual goals and beliefs regarding the bank. With the American system, the banks were positively impacted. Andrew Jackson was strongly against the banking and American systems and desired the banks to be terminated completely. Clay, on the other hand, saw the importance of having the banks in our country. Jackson and Clay weren't the best of pals, you could say. They disagreed on many topics, and the creation of the American system did not assist their friendship. There is no argument that Clay would go to any distance to make America as sufficient and as as it possibly could be. Clay's love for America was most likely, was very strong, and the pride that he had for his country was untoppable. Clay was so proud of American products that as a Speaker of the House of Kentucky, he would not allow his members to wear suits imported from Great Britain. Instead, they were required to wear only suits made in America. Henry Clay was a man of numerous achievements, including the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, and of course, the American system. His goal was always to make America an all-around more sufficient and independent country. One day, Clay said, "The Constitution of the United States was made not merely for the generation that then existed, but for posterity, unlimited, undefined, endless, perpetual posterity." For me, this quote shows how much Clay longed for a well-governed and successful country, for every generation to follow after him. Henry Clay will never be forgotten, and I'm sorry for those of you who never fully had the chance to truly meet him and see what an amazing man he was. He will deeply be missed. Thank you for everyone for your time, and rest in peace, Henry Clay.
Stephen Douglas.
Is it Emma Fenton?
No, she's James K. Polk. Where's Emma? Oh, Sarah.
Where's Sarah?
She had.
Remember she told
Yeah, the doctor's appointment.
She's probably doing that.
Am I good to go? All right. That's fine. Greetings, everyone. I'm Stephen Douglas, and I hope we are able to honor Henry Clay today. I worked very closely with Henry as we worked together on the Compromise of 1850. It was a very stressful situation for the both of us, as well as the other compromiser who worked on it with us, because we all felt as if the Union was resting on our shoulders, which, in a way, it was. For most of my life, I have never seen eye to eye with Henry Clay. I grew up as a strong supporter of Andrew Jackson and his ideas, but more often than not, Clay was the one fighting with Jackson over the ideas I supported. But during the compromise, it really took a turn for the both of us. I actually agreed with many of his ideas for the compromise, and to say the least, it shocked me. Clay once said, "I have heard something said about allegiance to the South. I know no South, no North, no East, and no West to which I owe any allegiance to." Which I believe this really speaks to his character, because during all of his compromises, he worked for the best of the Union as a whole, not just a specific region. I happen to agree with him on this, especially in terms of slavery. Neither of us were exactly fond of slavery, but we both put it into perspective of the entire United States and realized that even if we don't like it, the Union is much bigger than the two of us, and that we would much rather have the Union remain together than have a few people with the same view as us be happy. So the Fugitive Slave Act came into play, and honestly, it caused many problems for me down the road. At least he got to die 2 years later after, but I had to face much more backlash than he ever did. Clay's main goal was to avoid civil war in America, and my main goal was to keep the Union alive. And if you can't tell already, there's a lot of overlap between those two goals. So more often than not, we agreed, so we could both reach our similar goals. And in the end, I kind of have to be okay with the guy, because I sort of took his job after he died. And it wouldn't be good if you're hating on the dead guy whose job you stole. Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. I'm sick. I am James G. Burney. My dear historical friends, we are gathered here to mourn the death of Henry Clay. I respect Clay, and I once worked under his campaign when he was running for U.S. Congress in 1815. Clay and I did share similar views, and he ultimately was influential in my life and career, and I played a part in his as well. I was once a member of the Democratic Party. Clay's implementation of the American system consisted of economic improvements, including a protective tariff.
The American system reflected the Whig Party, and I ultimately moved closer to it and farther from the Democrats because of my liking of this tariff. Henry Clay's American system affected my political path when I began moving closer to the Whig Party. I was also once a slaveholder, with my father and grandfather believing in the financial profit created from slavery. However, forming close relationships with the people my family held in bondage got a start on my struggle with its existence. I am now a strong abolitionist. Henry Clay saw the evil in slavery as well, wishing it had not been created. However, Clay saw abolition as too much of a dangerous action that would result in a bloody civil war. He also believed that each state had no right to interfere with the slavery happening in a different state. This idea was seen in the Missouri Compromise, which Clay played a leading role in, settling tensions between slave and free states by setting a boundary line on the southern border of Missouri. On the other hand, I support immediate abolition with the hopes of ending slavery's cruelty right away. The fate of slavery's demise was one aspect that Clay and I displayed slightly different views on. In the presidential election of 1844, I was ultimately the reason for Henry Clay losing. I am a prominent member in the Liberty Party, and our only aim is abolition. I stood as the presidential candidate for the Liberty Party in the election of 1844. One of my goals was to spread the abolitionist movement to others, and I am known for my quote, "Give me liberty and give me the election." I wanted to win the election for the Liberty Party that was counting on me, and for every man, woman, and child in captivity. I received approximately 62,000 votes out of 2.5 million votes cast, and Henry Clay lost to James Polk by fewer than 38,000. I ended up winning the election for James K. Polk and lost it for Henry Clay because of the votes he lost to my candidacy. Sorry, Henry, I hope you don't hold grudges, because I'm really scared of ghosts. Abolitionists tend to favor the Whig Party, so if I had not run, some of the 62,000 people that voted for me may have voted for Clay and won the election for him instead. Overall, I respect Henry Clay and am very shocked by his death. Although I am the reason he did not win the presidential election, he did play an important role in American politics and economy. Thank you.
Please don't take out any paper. I hate when that happens. Rip the copy, but the paper's okay.
Hello, I'm George Washington, first President of the United States, as everyone knows, father of the country. Today we gather to reflect on the life of Henry Clay. A loved politician by many, hated by all of his critics. Henry Clay was a member of Congress's Great Triumvirate with Daniel Webster and John C. Calhoun, and was known and gained a reputation as the great compromiser due to his success with mediating between competing interests and keeping the nation together as a union. I strongly believe in a nation in the nation. Taking part in the American Revolution during my time, I was Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army and was a strong nationalist, and instead of seeing the colonies as separate colonies, I saw us as a nation. Henry Clay supported the War of 1812 and was a war hawk. Unlike Henry Clay, I didn't follow these similar views of war. I did partake in the French and Indian War and the American Revolution, but when it came to the French Revolution, I drafted a proclamation of neutrality. I thought it was better for America to stay out of the war and to gain its feet and stand up and work together as a nation. Also, like Clay, I believed in the emancipation of slaves. However, Clay and I saw different views of that. Clay believed that gradual emancipation was the way to go, and believed that slaves should be relocated to Africa, and believed in the American Colonization Society. I believed that gradual emancipation was also a good idea, and despite the fact that both of us owned slaves, and I wrote to emancipate them in my own will. One of the things that I believe all of the critics of Henry Clay can agree on with me is that Henry Clay is a nationalist. He was a proponent of the American system, an economic policy aimed at strengthening the federal system. I am also a strong believer in a federal government. In my farewell address that I wrote before, as I was leaving office for my second term, despite some people who wanted me to stay in for a third, I wrote, "Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism." I took that to be interpreted in many ways, and it can be seen in many ways, but I believe that those appear to have, the good of the country in mind, but they truly don't, are the ones to look out for. And Henry Clay inspired many through all of his works with different compromises and things like that. And in the Senate in 1848, he spoke, "I have heard something said about allegiance to the South. I know no South, no North, no East, no West, to which I owe allegiance." But what many forget is the end of his quote. "The Union, sir, is my country." And I believe the end of that expresses how truly he cared and wanted the nation to stick together. And although many of our large moments came apart, Henry Clay and I have similar beliefs. Although we differed on some of our stances, I do believe both of us had the interest of the nation first. Rest in peace, Henry Clay. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Jackson. I am the leader of the Democratic Party, a two-term president of the United States, and the man chiefly responsible for the Jacksonian era, which spanned from about 1824 to 1840. I've been asked here today to remember Henry Clay, the leader of the Whig Party, five-time presidential candidate, Secretary of State under John Quincy Adams, Speaker of the House, and influential member of the Senate. Clay played a central role in national politics for over 4 decades as a nationalist dedicated to economic development and political growth. However, Clay and I very rarely saw eye to eye. Personally, I feel Clay was untrustworthy, ambitious, and a man devoted to wealth and aristocrats. These characteristics were shown on various occasions over the course of Clay's political career. First off, Clay was a proponent of the American system, which meant he supported a tariff to promote American industry, desired a national bank, and wanted to see federally funded internal improvements. I greatly opposed this system, but especially the national bank, since it was a privileged institution and enemy of the common people. Clay proposed a recharter for the Bank of the United States in 1832, but I vetoed this idea since it advanced the few at the expense of the many. In addition, Clay did not support my Indian Removal Act, which outlined a plan to move the Indian tribes west of the Mississippi River. Doing so would preserve peace with the Indians and protect the tribes from danger. However, Clay thought the rights of the Indians were being violated. I disagree and feel that over the course of my presidency, I was always looking out for the interests of the common working people of America. Also, as I mentioned above, Clay was a 5-time presidential candidate. However, he lost each time. When Clay ran against myself, I won 56% of the popular vote and won 5 times more electoral votes. While Clay had an influential political career, he was never able to reach his ultimate goal, the White House. On top of this, to this day I hold Clay personally responsible for the death of my dear wife, Rachel. He slandered her good name to the point where she could no longer take the abuse and ridicule during my presidential campaign, causing her heart to stop days after my inauguration. This is an evil of his that I will never be able to forgive. However, one bright spot in our relationship was the War of 1812. Clay was a war hawk, meaning he supported going to war with Britain. At that time, I was a major general and was called a hero of the war, which ultimately jump-started my political career, thanks to Clay's support of the war with Britain. It is a sad day when a nation loses a man who loved his country as much as Henry Clay did. However, I feel it is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their own selfish purposes. Henry Clay was a Whig leader who was looking out for his best interests and those of the aristocracy. He opposed me at nearly every opportunity as I pursued the interests of the common working American man. His untrustworthy and ambitious tendencies were shown throughout his career, and I truly feel future American policy will undoubtedly continue to be influenced by Clay's politics, despite my deepest wishes that this does not happen. Thank you everyone for asking me here today and allowing me to speak on behalf of Henry Clay.
And just so you guys know, we're going to finish this today, so when the bell rings, we'll continue talking, okay? Take a good breath.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James Madison, and I had the pleasure of personally knowing Henry Clay during his time on this earth. Henry was able to accomplish many high-ranking positions throughout his political career. He had represented Kentucky in the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, served 3 terms as the Speaker for the House of Representatives, and had even served as the Secretary of State when John Quincy Adams had been president. Henry had even tried to run for president, but was not as successful as he had hoped. That did not matter to him, for the most part. I remember him saying that he'd, quote, rather be right than be president, end quote, directly to the U.S. Senate. Most of the time, he was right in my book. We had both been a part of the Democratic-Republican Party, so many of our political views had been the same. In regards to government power, we both believed that it should be limited. A more distributed and equal government would be better for the U.S., and Henry was a supporter of this. We were able to share our thoughts and ideas on many pieces of government through numerous letters that we had always seemed to be going back and forth between us. We had agreed on many things, especially when Henry had sought for the power of the office speaker to be increased, to which I had decided to aid him. I also believed in the need for more power for Congress, so his need soon became my goals to fulfill. Lastly, during the War of 1812, Henry and I became partners in crime. When I had requested for armies and navies to be made, Henry was there to help pass it on later to be executed. When I had called for war, Henry led the House of Representatives to a quick declaration of war against Britain. He had always tried to be on my side and do what I would do in his place. To me, Henry was a close friend, and there may not ever be another that compares to him. This may be a dreadful and gloomy day, but it is also a day of remembrance, and with remembrance comes all the good things Henry had done for the U.S., and especially myself. Rest in peace, Henry Clay, and thank you for being a true partner for many years.
Hello, I'm FDR. Today we are here to honor and acclaim the life of Henry Clay. Although I did not know Henry personally and we were from opposing parties, we were both like-minded in the economic stability of America and the protection of our great nation. Henry Clay was inspired by the ideas of Alexander Hamilton's American School. Clay set out to develop a plan that would strengthen and unify the nation. His plan, the American System, set out to do 3 things: support a high tariff to generate funds for the American government and support industry, strengthen the federal banks in order to stabilize currency and minimize the unstable local and state banks, and develop infrastructure that would unify the nation through roads and canals. Although personally I am not fond of tariffs, I do applaud the spirit of Henry Clay's plan. As president, I annulled President Hoover's Tariff Act of 1930, also known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, which raised taxes on over 900 American imports. It was not this act alone that sent us into the Great Depression, but it did not help either. I recognized something that had to be done to rectify the faulty economic policy. I was determined to reduce tariffs in order to open and expand trade and commerce, which would help to lead our country out of despair. It was for this reason I repealed this act. Revenue is important to the American government as it was used to fund programs and support industry, but it cannot be done in a way that will decimate the economy.
May I please have Shannon Elliott and Brendan Sullivan to the office? Shannon Elliott and Brendan Sullivan.
It is essential to have a strong economy to support and protect the American people. It was my duty as the President of the United States to support the American people and to provide them with services and economic opportunities that would stabilize and improve the economy as well moved out of the Depression era. We must ensure that the country does not regress into economic instability and depression. It was my obligation to reform legislation that would weed out corruption and lack of regulations, which led to this difficult economic time for our country. We must provide relief for our citizens that are in economic despair. We need to launch recovery efforts for our citizens and reform legislation to ensure that our nation never falls into economic depression again. Second, Henry supported the restatement of the Second Bank of America in 1816 as a way to stabilize the currency of America. Henry, along with Nicholas Biddle, stood strong against President Andrew Jackson, who was against the bank as he believed that it was run by the wealthy and oppressed the common people. Clay was well respected and had infectious optimism. His followers risked their political positions in order to promote the early recharter of the Second Bank of the United States. He was confident in its success in stabilizing the currency and controlling credit, and as a result, strengthening opportunities for American citizens. In my first inaugural address, I assured the American people that I would take a stand against and try to resolve the nation's economic problems. In that speech, I said, "This great nation will endure as it is endured, will receive and will prosper." So, first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert, retreat, and advance. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and vigor has met with that understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory. I am convinced that you will again give the support to leadership in these critical days. I took immediate steps of solving the country's economic problems following this speech. I declared that the bank should close for a 4-day holiday to stop people from withdrawing their money from the unstable banks. On March 9, 1933, Congress supported and passed the Emergency Banking Act that recognized banks and closed those that were unable to pay any debts on March 12, 1933. In my first fireside chat, I encouraged people to put their money back into the banks, and by April, most of those banks had reopened. Clay built roads, canals, and other internal improvements to help put people into jobs, which I also did with the New Deal program that addressed public works and placing money towards infrastructure. I promoted several pieces of legislation that supported the building of America. In my first 100 days in office, I saw the passage of 12 major laws and several bills that promoted the improvement of the nation's economic and social health. Most notably were the Glass-Steagall Banking Bill and the Homeowners Loan Act. In my second New Deal Act, I created the WPA that provided jobs for the unemployed and focused on the buildings of post office, bridges, schools, highways, and parks. In one of my speeches, I said, in our personal ambitions, we were individuals, but in our seeking for economic and political progress as a nation, we will all go up, or else all go down as one people. Henry and I shared the same thoughts and ideas when it came to the economy, and the quote outlines that what we were for, and that was to help the economy and help America as a whole. God. Both Henry and I saw war as a way to help America become stronger as a nation, but economically as well. Henry saw a war with Britain necessary to preserve the overseas markets of American merchants. I saw war with Japan and ultimately Germany as a way to defend our borders, but also improve the moral and pride in Americans. Henry Clay was a visionary and great politician who was influential in our United States history. As a fellow politician, I am deeply saddened by the loss of our friend Henry Clay, and my thoughts and prayers go out to his family.
That was like 5 minutes long.
Jesus Christ.
That was like...
I don't know what order these pages go in, but they're great.
Bandanas are meant to...
Is this like actually life?
It's no other reason.
My God. Okay. Okay. Greetings, everyone. My name is Daniel Webster. Here we are gathered here today to both honor the life of and mourn the death of Henry Clay. As an influential American man, Clay's life was one that will be remembered throughout the ages of the country which he loved and aided during his years at his positions. Clay, not only a colleague and supporter of on a political aspect, was a close friend of mine. A fellow Whig, Henry and I shared many of the same outlooks on our country and how it should be and should have been governed. Despite our rivalry during the presidential election of 1848, Henry Clay and I have been supporters of one another's political outlooks. We together were proponents of anti-slavery acts and popular sovereignty in the land acquired from Mexico. His formulation of the Missouri Compromise and Compromise of 1850 had my complete support and would not have passed without my help. Clay and I both attempted to save the Union within the U.S. during the disputes over slavery. We both believe that our nation should be free rather than a nation of slavery. I once said, "Justice, sir, is the great interest of man on earth and is the ligament which holds civilized beings and civilized nations together." Our shared firm beliefs and anti-slavery sentiments in this statement from myself further display the idea that we believed in a free United States. Once again, we were both at the same perspective when, in regards to the annexation of Texas and waging war with Mexico, Henry and I both contradicted the ideas of beginning a war. A war with Mexico would divide the nation, and we both believed it would break apart the strong Union, just as we believe slavery, as well as the brewing war between the northern and southern regions would. We both had equal fears of tensions growing within and between the regions of the states. On other political standpoints, Clay and I were colleagues in more ways. I endorsed his American system with my belief in tariffs, transportation, internal improvements, and most importantly, the national bank. Our shared support of the American system joined us together in opposition against Jackson as a united Whig party, and we both supported the federal government of the United States. Henry Clay, my friend, rival, and fellow politician, may this great compromiser forever rest in peace, as he still lives on in the government of America and all he has done to improve our nation. Thank you.
He's like, what the hell? Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Martin Van Buren. You probably know me as the 8th President of the United States, as well as a former Senator, Secretary of State, and Vice President to Andrew Jackson. I'm also a Democrat and have recently joined the Free Soil Party. On top of that, I helped to decentralize the bank and enforce the Indian Removal Act, moving Cherokee Indians away from the lands of Americans and out to Indian territory, where they would be able to thrive. Clay was a senator, ran for the presidency 3 different times and lost, and served as the Secretary of State, all just like me. Also, he and I were both war hawks who wanted to go to war with Britain as the British were interfering with our trade and allied with the Indians to attack us. That's about where the similarities end. Past those points, we were nearly opposites, but still I've decided to give a eulogy today. Clay and I never really got along. To be quite honest, he despised Jackson and I, but we hated him too, so it was okay. Perhaps the biggest reason we could never be friends was our different political views. I was a Democrat, he was a Whig. There was no way to get around that. It's like Catholics and Protestants. No matter what, there's always some major difference between them that can't be overcome. One of our major differences was in Clay's stupid American system. As I always said, the less government interferes with private pursuits, the better for general prosperity. But no, Clay didn't want to listen to me. He wanted a national bank for stability, high tariffs to pay industries and make money for the United States, along with a high price on public land and the creation of a system of roads and canals that would make travel easier. In my opinion, this just gives the government too much control over the economy. All of these economic aspects controlled by the same people who need the money in the first place, that can't turn out well. Also, this could increase the gap between the rich and the poor. Luckily, Andrew Jackson was able to step in and veto the recharter of the bank before Clay could get his way. Truth be told, I don't think Clay cared about the gap between the rich and poor, as some of his ideas would actually make the gap bigger. This was somewhat irritating to me and my fellow Democrats, as we wanted to see that gap closed and still do to this day. This, too, shows where Clay's priorities lie. Another problem Clay and I had was in my enforcing of the Indian Removal Act. Jackson and I just wanted to move the Indians to an area where their race could survive much better than if they were spread out in white settled areas. The act was made to appease both the Southerners and the Indians, however, Clay disagreed. He believed Jackson and I were only enforcing this act to get the Indians away from the Southerners and tear apart the Cherokee Nation. This was completely false, and Jackson and I had proved previously that we were for the common man of America, whereas Clay mostly supported the rich. So who do you believe should be trusted here? In the middle of this whole debacle about the Indian relocation, I was elected into the presidency. I won by a good margin in the electoral vote and a few thousands of votes in the popular vote. As most of you probably know, Clay never won a presidential election out of the 3 times he ran. If he can't even win once in 3 times, and I was able to win the first year that I ran, then I believe that proves that more people agree with me and my beliefs, and he had little support whatsoever. Oh no, I've turned this into a political competition on the funeral of my own opponent. I didn't mean to be so disrespectful. Aside from our differences, Clay was an intelligent man that did do some good for our country. His compromises were able to somewhat fix large problems that arose over the nation involving slavery and land. The way he came up with the ideas to settle disputes over the territories that would be slave states in both the Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 is astounding even to me. Without these compromises, America could have fallen into turmoil if the slave states were outnumbered by free states, and the nation could have been divided altogether in 2. So cheers to Henry Clay. Even though we weren't allies in our lives, I do believe he was a great man in that he helped to hold America together during those harsh times of conflict. Also, he allowed America to succeed in gaining new land as successfully as possible, without any extreme internal distress that could have torn the nation apart. Rest in peace, Mr. Clay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It is with great sadness that I speak before you all today in June of 1852 at the funeral of our dear friend Henry Clay. Let me first introduce myself. Some of you may think I look a little familiar. If so, you likely recognize me from my picture on the $10 bill. My name is Alexander Hamilton, and I am one of our great country's founding fathers. I am a lawyer, a statesman, a soldier, and in 1789, George Washington appointed me as the first Secretary of the Treasury. As a member of the Continental Congress, I fought for the U.S. Constitution and believe that it helps guarantee a strong central government. This is key to our country's independence. I designed the Treasury Department to collect and disperse public revenue and also promote the economic development of our country. One of my top priorities has been to establish a strong plan for our national economy. But enough about me. We are here today to honor another great man, Henry Clay. My friend Henry was born April 12, 1777 in Virginia. He had 11 beautiful children and is survived by his wife, Lucretia. They were married for more than 50 years. He began his career as an attorney and at a very young age of 29 became a Kentucky senator. Later, at the ripe old age of 33, he would become the Speaker of the House of Representatives, serving in that capacity longer than anyone else in the 19th century. He came to the House of Representatives as a leader of the Warhawks, a pro-war Republican who believed war with Britain was necessary, leading to the War of 1812 and independence from England. He also served as Secretary of State under John Quincy Adams. He would serve 3 terms in the House and 4 terms in the Senate. But Henry Clay is probably best known as a great compromiser. He led the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which maintained a balance in Senate between free and slave states. Clay's Compromise tariff of 1833 gradually lowered tariff levels, which helped avoid civil war and prolong the Union another 30 years. And the Compromise of 1850 was a package of 5 bills that dealt with the often complicated issue of slavery. Henry was 5 times an unsuccessful presidential candidate. I don't think anyone would say that Henry gave up on anything very easily. Henry Clay and I had very common ideas and beliefs about the economic needs of this country. I strongly support an economic plan known as the American School or the National System. It is comprised of 3 parts. 1, it proposes limited tariffs on imports to subsidize industry in America, creating an environment to foster growth of manufacturing in the United States. 2, it supports investment in internal improvements for our country, especially in the area of transportation infrastructure. And 3, it supports having a national bank created to recover from the depths of the Revolutionary War. I believe the government should assume the entire debts of the states and the federal government. Henry Clay promoted my economic system under his plan, known as the American System. His plan, like mine, consisted of 3 parts: tariffs to protect and promote American industry, a national bank to foster commerce, and federal subsidies for roads, canals, and other internal improvements. Under the American system, the U.S. will grow into the largest economy in the world with the highest standard of living, surpassing Britain by the 1880s. In closing, Henry Clay and I both strongly believe that the United States should be economically independent and nationally self-sufficient. I always say if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. There is no doubt that Henry Clay is widely respected for his contributions to this great country, so it is fitting that he will be the first person ever to be laid in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Henry was especially admired by our great President Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Henry Clay is dead. His long and eventful life is closed. Our country is prosperous and powerful, but could it have been quite all it has been and is to be without Henry Clay? I wonder that myself." Thank you.
All right, guys. Good work today. If you guys did not turn in if you didn't turn in your eulogies, please give them to me now.
Sweet, that's what I put.
So I know some people are going to phys ed. Where are other people going?
I like. Can we turn in this too?
No, you're holding on to them because we still have 4 boards to listen to.
First aid.
First aid.
Okay.
Don't worry, we're all going to.
We'll just all go to PE. We were filming.
Wait, is that what these things are?
Yeah.
They're cameras? Wait, so they could hear us? Oh wait, no, they're pointed. I'm pretty sure I picked that one up, to be honest.
Yeah, that is not facing at the thing anymore.
Miss Kennedy.
Yes.
No, it's Henry Clay run for president
not,
3 or 5
times?
times?
It's facing towards the cops.
Yeah. Should wait for Joey then.
Tammy and Caitlin, do you mind taking Henry Clay upstairs across